All right. So this is the Art Postgraduate Talk Series. The talk series is organized by... Oh, please. Do you want me to point a laser at you to shut you up? Okay. So the series is organized by the program leaders for the postgraduate program. So Anna Collin for curating, Edgar Schmitz for the PhD, Elle Reynolds for graduate diploma, Gail Pickering, Artist Film Moving Image. Roz, you're exactly where you need to be. I'm Suhail Malik, so that's me. And I teach on the MFA Fine Art. The information about the VLE, about the Art Postgraduate Talks is on the VLE. This is the QR code, so if you want more information about the talks coming up and so on and so forth, use this. I've tested it, it should work. So for the introduction today, there's quite a lot we need to do before I introduce Gary Shekshisang, who's the speaker. I'm going to tell you what the postgraduate talks are in relation to the rest of your programs. And I'm going to do, Roz and I are going to do a broad introduction on the theme of planetarities in the plural. Okay, I'll do the first bit quite quickly. So what we're trying to do with the postgraduate talk is provide a general context for what the program leaders, there's our sense of what matters for artists and people in the art field working today. Most of the teaching of the department is what we call student-centered, which is that you come in with your practices, your specific interest. We support that on a case-by-case, one-to-one basis. There aren't many opportunities where we come in with what we think is important, a kind of framework for artistic practice, and that framework can come from many different things, either changes in the art field or issues which are kind of broader concern like the planetary and the move from the global to the planetary. Okay, so the postgraduate talks are just to give an overview of a large context which may not be immediately of consequence to you for your practice, but we think is a way to think about changes in the art space and the ways that we talk about things. Okay, because our concepts and the ideas and the critiques that we work with aren't historically stable. They change according to how the world is changing. So what we're trying to address in the postgraduate talks is a common situation for everyone, but especially people working in the art field. As I said earlier, for example, a critical framework that we just assume and trying to understand whether that's still the right place to be. The currency of the issues that we're dealing with, and maybe that'll become more apparent when we start talking about the planetary contrasted to the global. We try and introduce some challenges to conventional critical frameworks. We'll see how successful that is. I think today's talk will probably be quite challenging for most of us in a good way. What we're not doing is providing you with a course that you then have to go and do some study for or do some pre-reading for. Okay, so there's no syllabus associated with this, and there's no required reading. Okay, so it's a kind of input or a kind of propulsion, a demand that's put upon you to kind of think about what you're doing in relation to a context that might be a little bit far away for some of you, a lot closer for others, but we think kind of informs the general space that we're working in as people interested in art making now. So this series of talks for the first term is Planetarities in the Plural. We'll explain in a bit why that title. These are the speakers. I don't think we should introduce it now. I think just move into, all right. But these are the dates. So the next talk is in 2 weeks. There's a midterm break, a reading week in between the second and third talks. And then there's 2 weeks between Planetary Portals and Lukasz Lekavchan, who's doing the last talk this term. All right. So there's only 4 talks. Each of these speakers is coming from a different angle, but all of them are trying to understand this emerging notion of the planetary. And what we're trying to do is just give you like a matrix or a scheme to understand this term. And as I said earlier, you can then think about whether this term matters for you or whether it changes anything about thinking of the whole, essentially. All right, so the format of the talks is a standard 34-minute presentation, then a discussion here at the table with the host. In this case today, it'll be me. Roz will be doing the second and third talks. I'll be doing the fourth talk. And then there'll be Q&A for about half an hour with you guys. Okay? And that discussion, 10, 15 minutes, is just to go over like main issues in the talk and also give you time to think about any questions you might want to formulate. I should also mention there's a bar after the talks, which is, does anybody here anybody from MFA Fine Art? Do you want to mention the bar, or should I do it? So basically, the end-of-year exhibition for the MFA Fine Art is self-funded by the students. The after bar is something that they've organized as a bit of fundraising. It's not just alcoholic drinks, it's also non-alcoholic drinks. It's the one point in the term, or in the week, where all the students from all the different programs meet. Okay, we don't usually see each other because the programs are quite siloed. So it's quite a good place just to kind of get to know each other and find out what the other program is about and like what's going on across the department postgraduate provision. All right, so Planetarities in the Plural. So we're now a quarter of the way through the 21st century. We're now closer by 3.5 months to 2050 than we are to the year 2000. So we're heading towards Q2, the second quarter of the 20th century. We're now in it. And what we know is a bit of a shit show, right? So the major issues that are facing us compared to the recent history are climate breakdown, obviously, and deglobalization. And deglobalization is a way to talk about the breakdown of the globalization project, which was put in place from like the 90s, early 90s onwards. And it seems pretty clear that the resurgence of state nationalism and racist nationalism around the world are ways of people responding to deglobalization and the costs of globalization on states and on nations. But this climate breakdown and deglobalization aren't a prospect or an impending future or a threat. They're our here and now. Okay, this is the world that we occupy right now. So we seem to be back in some kind of history after what Francis Fukuyama in the early 90s called the end of history. And the end of history was a way for Fukuyama to think about. I'll put the reference up in a minute. The end of history was a way for Fukuyama to identify the domination of the West and of liberal democracies after the collapse of Soviet communism in the late 80s. It was also a way to signify supposed post-colonial alignment with liberal democratic conventions, which was often coerced by World Bank and IMF through debt restructuring, getting those countries to align with Western-led globalization, global trade. And it was also a way to think a bit later about that alignment with liberal democratic conventions or with Western global trade imperatives was reinforced by US-led crushing of East Asian economies in the mid to late 90s. Okay? So the end of history is really a way to think about globalization as the world-dominant narrative and also the world-dominant arrangement between different regions and different countries and so on. But this end, we know, was a narrative of Western historical supremacy. It's a kind of follow-through to Western modernity into a postmodern, commercially interchangeable globe. And in this, it signaled a phase shift from Western modernity to globalization, a shift accompanied by changes in what you might call historical operating systems. So this table kind of summarizes that point, which is basically from about 1650, like early 1700s, Western modernity, for the West, Western modernity was the way things worked. The whole that Western modernity referred to was the world. The scale it operated at was a nation state, the nation or the state, which is like a mesoscale, like a mid-level, medium-scale operation. The agent of that modernity was the subject, and the art of that modernity came to be known as modernism. Okay? So that's kind of what a lot of art history is concerned with. Postmodernity, the whole is not the world, but the globe. Okay, globalization. The scale it operated at, the scale it operated at was more the individual or the firm, which is a microscale. The agent was not the subject, but the consumer, the entrepreneur. And the art of this postmodernity was contemporary art, which is predominantly what we do here. Okay. But in this era of globalization, Gayatri Spivak in 2003, so about 10, 15 years into the globalization era, proposed a counter-ethics of planetarity, which for her meant a way of relating to difference at scales commensurate with globalization, so this kind of whole, right? But it wasn't the commercial whole, or the whole organized through the consumer, the entrepreneur, but a way of thinking about the alterities involved when we encounter each other at the scale of the whole globe. I'm going to hand over to Roz, who will speak a bit more about this alternative image of the planetary.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things we were thinking about with Planetarities in the Plural is that we have an intersecting interest in this and we think it's broadly important, but we also come from very different positions. And I think one of the ways in which I'm interested in Planetarity is that it involves relations to land in the broadest sense as that which enables the habitability of the planet. And that which sustains us, that which perhaps we have an elemental kinship with. And so Spivak evokes the land to suggest a kind of planetary belonging, suggesting we belong to land or to the planet rather than certain humans or communities or economies owning or territorializing land, and that this creates a different kind of accountability. So underpinning Spivak's argument is this interest in how knowledge is situated, and that's something we talk a lot about, is how knowledge is embodied and is kind of contingent to particular spaces and times. And also how theoretical concepts and discourses emerge from practices. And that's, I think, something that I hope will emerge in the talks that we're going to have in the following weeks. So they're practices that are embedded, political, and like non-transferable to a certain extent. You know, they're not like the sort of flow of commodities through globalization. Another theme that I think would be great to kind of start to grapple with in these coming weeks is, in a way, the radical interdisciplinarity of art as a space holder for different kinds of practice and communities in dialogue, collaboration, and tension with one another. So this is not the smooth space of globalization where everything's interchangeable, rather it's a space of incommensurabilities, of scale, of ideas, of situativeness, and so on.
Great. So I think do you have more, is that? No. Okay. So I think in addition to the other ways of belonging to land, rather than ownership or commerce, what we're noticing with climate breakdown is the vulnerabilities. We saw this a lot through the COVID period, right? The vulnerabilities that climate breakdown introduces in supply chains that are the material conditions of globalization. So my interest isn't so much around the relation to land, but about how the supply chains that we rely on through globalization, which were constructed in these very long supply chains, which was known as globalization, kind of become extremely susceptible to things like changing weather conditions, fires, other kind of hazards from climate. And this has led to planetarity also signifying, in addition to what Roz has just pointed out, a kind of material interconnectedness of climate, economic, and environmental systems, which we'll also cover in the presentations. So I mean, this is all kind of fairly large scale. There's a recent book by Jonathan Blake and Niels Gilman called Children of a Modest Star, and they've got this quite useful summary about the move from globe and globalization to the planetary. So they say, this is quite a long quote, so please bear with us. The global of globalization, as historian Dipesh Chakrabarty has pointed out in a book called The Climate in the Planetary Age, I think, so this globe of globalization is not the same as the global of global climate change. Okay, so there's at least two types of globe you need to think about. The global of globalization is a conceptual category which Roz has just mentioned is like the smooth space of trade and economics and the rest of it, that frames the Earth in human terms. Hence, globalization's human-centric understanding of the worldwide integration of the last few decades, the accelerating flow of people, their goods, their ideas, their money, their data, us, basically. Like contemporary art is very much of this space, okay? This vision of the globe makes plain that Earth is not humanity's, I've kind of jumped a bit. The globe of global climate change, by contrast, frames Earth without specific reference to humans. This vision of the globe makes plain that Earth is not humanity's alone. We share it with other living beings, non-living matter, and forms of energy. The incongruity, the incompatibility between the two global ideas requires distinguishing between them. The human-centric global of globalization can remain the global globe. That's the familiar way of thinking about it. The Earth-centric global of global climate change is better understood as the planet or the planetary. The intellectual development of the concept of the planetary, the intensification of anthropogenic effects on the planet, human-generated effects on the planet like climate breakdown, and the development of a technosphere capable of sensing these effects together reveals our condition of planetarity, representing at once an ontological transformation, meaning a change in how and what things are and why they are that way, and also an epistemic break, a change in systems of knowledge with previous understandings of human positions of the planet. Oh, I think I've read all of it. Sorry,
That's
Ros.
fine. You're reading it so well. That's fine.
Sorry, we were going to share the reading, so Ros was going to do this bit, but my notes didn't match that. So, in addition, so I think the planetary seems to me to add another row to that table, which then looks more like this. All right, so this is like the modernity row. This is the post-modernity row. That's us approximately. This is the planet. It's not the globe and it's not the world. The scales it operates at, everything, all the scales at once, micro, meso, and macro. The question is, what is the era that we're in? This question mark can be answered by shit show. That's fair. That's kind of the real-time version of it. It's also, in relation to talk I was doing for Lawrence Leck's exhibition, we could think of this as sino-modernity. It's the Anthropocene. Like, this is still undecided. The agent, we don't yet know what the agent is. Probably many agents to do with the different scales and how they work with each other. So there might be more contingency in that agent than there has been in the other framings. And we don't know what the art of this time is. Okay? And my sense is that we're probably somewhere on this line here between contemporary art and the next thing. So this is the challenge. And we said earlier that these talks are about presenting a common challenge for all of us working in the art space. I don't think we as tutors know what we're heading into because it's a very large problem, but all we can do is start informing ourselves about how to think around this. So the series of talks gives some indicators for how to address the planetary or planetarity according to some of its scales. And each of the talks will probably operate at a different one of these scales. And I think across the talks we'll probably have a multi-scalar, some introduction to kind of multi-scalar thinking. We're going to try and find a way of traversing or orienting ourselves through this notion of planetarity, not as a unified or established concept, but according to its plurality, hence planetarity in the plural.